Welcome to Breaking Down Bergman. I'm David Friend.
And I'm Sonia Strimban.
And this is the final episode of the series. We've made it. Surprisingly.
Oh my. I thought you said you didn't want it to sound final.
It's been quite a while, but we've made it.
It's kind of bittersweet.
Yeah, it is kind of strange because we spent so long talking about this day, and now we have to analyze it, which might be the most challenging part.
Is this an essential episode?
Yeah, is it essential? That's a good question. I think we can use this as an opportunity to sort of reflect on the series, reflect on our objectives, because when we started this, for one, we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into, and two, we didn't know what we would achieve necessarily. I mean, we knew the main objective, but the intention was to watch an artist progress from the beginning of their career to the end, which is why we chose Ingmar Bergman, someone who had died already. I guess the question is, do you think that we got to where we wanted to be?
I think we definitely achieved the majority of our objectives. For me, it was a great learning experience. I mean, I'd never invested this much time in one individual's artistic career before. There's times when you can enjoy a particular director or an author if you're reading, literature, and you kind of sporadically watch or, consume their creations over time. But in this case, to do it so consistently, week after week, in order, with a historical context, with a biographical context, it gave it a completely different lens, and I think really enriched our ability to understand both how he made art and how his art influenced others.
The first time that we sat down, we said it was going to be roughly 60 films of Ingmar Bergman. Turned out it wasn't. It was a lot less, mostly because several of them weren't available.
It wasn't a lot less. It was still quite a few.
It was quite a few. I think we were missing about 10 or so when it came down to it. But do you think that it really impacted how we viewed Ingmar Bergman and the progression of his career? Because that's ultimately what this project was about.
I mean, it's hard to tell not having seen them, but I think we concluded throughout that even when they were missing, there was enough context around them from either interviews or biographies or other projects that he worked on that it was sufficient to know what was happening in his life at the time.
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, it might be strange to talk about this because I'm not trying to toot our own horn, but what we wanted to do was create a community here that would talk about a film director, whoever it may be, and, hopefully get them to start a conversation about the specifics of the films, all the details. And I think so far we've seen a strong reception from complete strangers, which I think is fantastic. I mean, that was the intention, really.
For me, the feedback was very encouraging. I really enjoyed reading people's comments and getting their thoughts, especially when they agreed with us. But also when they disagreed, because they disagreed very thoughtfully. And that was always really nice to see. And it was a great learning experience. So for example, Winter Light was definitely a film that I struggled with. And I actually learned quite a lot from our viewers and what they shared around the reasons why they felt it was such an artful film and why, why they admired it and respected his work.
I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about the specific films, but I think before we get into that, I want to ask you, do you think that Ingmar Bergman, in reflection, was the right director to choose?
I don't know. I don't think I can answer that question. I think we could have been served very well by almost any director. Well, I don't know, maybe not Michael Bay, but I think he's definitely in the top 10 of all time. So it's a great place to start. I think we definitely threw ourselves into the deep end, if you will, by choosing Bergman because it's very challenging.
That's a good point. And sort of as a behind the scenes, we had debated a few different directors and settled on Bergman on the advice of a friend, actually. And I think that Bergman gave us just enough intricacies in each one of his films for us to discuss each one for 20 odd minutes and discuss it in detail and not feel like we were doing too much work or not enough work. It really created the right foundation to motivate others to engage in the conversation. I think a lot of other directors wouldn't have been suitable for that project, but did you find that all of the movies that people talk about as the essential Bergman titles were in fact your favorites?
I won't say that every single one was a favorite. I think I admired most of them because they were very skillful, and I mean, they were chosen for a reason by critics and scholars and you know, other people that love cinema. So you can't expect them to be poor choices. I think for me, knowing that they were so critical to his kind of filmography was almost a bit of a setback, because it changed my expectations going into the film. And I think I felt that most acutely with Seventh Seal, maybe because it was the first of like the big films.
Yeah.
And so I was expecting something like really profound. And then when we finished watching it, I was like, oh, it was just a period piece from the Dark Ages. And it wasn't until we really started doing our analysis and reading a lot of, you know, more of the critical reviews of it, that it really started to come together for me, and I saw what everyone else admired so much.
For me, I was actually surprised and maybe a little bit frustrated by how much I enjoyed the films that have widely been perceived as the classics. For example, Fanny and Alexander, I'd seen it before we started this project, but it was also one of my favorites. Persona, which I hadn't seen, I also really enjoyed.
Excellent
for the reasons that made it a film that everybody loves. There were a few hidden gems. I know we've talked about Face to Face as one in particular that you really enjoyed.
I loved Face to Face. I thought it was so psychologically stimulating. It was very intellectual. It was stylistically beautiful. Like, I just thought that there were so many pieces in that film that really were so unique to Bergman and came together really well, which is something that I know throughout all the decades sometimes we fault him for, like, oh my God, there's so much there and it's not coming together, how unfortunate. And in this film, at least for me, it came together. But I know that out there in the community, it's a very polarizing film.
Yeah, but there's other things I think that I learned from the project, and films in particular that I enjoyed because of this project, that I might have not otherwise. I mean, All These Women was a huge mess in a lot of ways, but we also got a little bit of glee out of it. And I think that, you know, it served the purpose of being a bit of a break amid a lot of heavy films done by the director. Through Glass Darkly, you know, it's
really good.
It receives a lot of acclaim, but it's not. It still felt like a discovery, I guess I could say, just because I knew it existed, but I wasn't all that familiar with it. And I mean, there's plenty of these films in his career. Prison, another one, for example, that sort of
very early success.
And it felt like a hidden gem too.
I think for me, when I look back at it, sometimes I think about it in terms of the decade and what was Bergman doing at that time in his life. But more often than not, I actually think about his collaborations, because he goes through these very distinct phases where he works with one particular actor or actress, and it really affects the tenure of the films, you know, and the texture of them and how they're delivered. So I'm always torn between the Harriet Anderson versus Lee Wallman kind of periods
of his life.
Yeah. And I lean more towards Harriet, because I feel like she's such a raw performer. Like all the roles that she played and all the performances she delivered, even when she's you know, an assisting character, or she's kind of more doing cameo, she steals the show for me all the time. And so I love a lot of the earlier pieces with her, Summer with Monica, Through Glass Darkly, which you mentioned. My favorite, of course, would be Sawdust and Tinsel, which I thought never really received the acclaim it should have.
I don't know if I could pick standout actors, but I did find that each period in Bergman's career, those actors served a certain purpose. And because he chose such experienced professionals, they managed to fit into the roles, and they managed to represent something that really stood for where Bergman was in his life. And I think if we got anything out of the project, at least speaking for myself, it's that we did see the progression of an artist, but also the progression of a human being. We learned about his personal life and sort of how it influenced his art, and then perhaps how the art influenced his personal life, and just how everything that Bergman did seemed to be part of his being. And I think that was one of the greatest rewards of this project, is that I felt like I began to know a person that I've never met, that I've never really studied per se, at least in a scholarly sense. But I know his beats. I know what he wants to do, what he tries to achieve, what he struggled with. And I think the discussion between us has really helped sort of unearth the intricacies of his life.
Well, I think maybe that's why he's such a magnetic director, and why the people that love Bergman is because he's so transparent in a lot of ways. Not transparent, it's not the films that are transparent, i.e. like you understand ABC, this is what happened. They're actually a lot more opaque and complex. But himself as an individual, he's so fused into his art. It's so autobiographical that you feel a sense of connection with the films. Even if you don't necessarily go through the same experiences, there's some kind of core, authentic human component in the majority of them, or at least you feel that that's what the film is trying to achieve, that you can say, yes, I relate to this quite profoundly, and therefore relate to Bergman himself. That is very magnetizing.
Now, aside from the general experiences that we had with the films, I think there was a lot of fun that we had off the screen too. Well, I guess some of it ended up on the screen. I mean, for example, I went and I interviewed Demon Theater.
And Sonia Strimban isn't here today. She's actually back in Canada. I'm in Los Angeles, however, where I had a chance to speak with Michael Moon, who's the president of Demon Theater.
We present new English translations of Bergman works, including early plays, screenplays, radio plays, all in new translations for a live audience. We started off with one of his films called Devil's Eye that we adapted, followed it up with 5 translations of radio plays, stage plays, and films.
And then ended up meeting Liv Ullmann.
Well, yes, there is a relationship between how we lived our lives together as friends and artistic collaborators and the movies that he made. But I never thought of it that way. Maybe because for me, I always think of Ingmar in a very personal way, and when I worked with him in the movies, I was the actress, and I didn't think in that personal way anymore.
I mean, these events would have never come about if it wasn't for this project, and unfortunately you weren't there to experience most of those. But I mean, you got to live vicariously through the videos, right?
Yes, sure.
I'm sorry. I wanted you to be there.
I was there in spirit.
But what I really enjoyed about the project is that, you know, it started out as literally us in an apartment watching movies, and then it became us filming a project in an apartment, yes, filming this project. But it started to take on its own life. And while I originally found Demon Theater just through some random Google searches, some of the other things sort of organically developed over time. And I mean, I would have never imagined that I would be in Sweden, literally looking, for example, when I looked at the screenplays that were handwritten by Bergman, I didn't think that we would come that close to whoever was the creator in our series.
I tend to think that his giving up of the archive was a part of his late career's interest in his own autobiography.
So welcome to the first edition of Breaking Down Bergman, which is a concept that we have decided to team up on.
Ambitiously embark on, I would say. I think we made progress not in just our knowledge about Bergman and cinema, but also in some of our technical capabilities and how these episodes started to look and feel after a little while.
Yeah, it was strange because before we started this discussion, we went back and took a look at the first few videos we made, which was, yeah, a little awkward, a little funny. Yeah. But even the first few spots, those 30-second bits that we created sort of get the YouTube channel rolling. I mean, even the music that was chosen for it.
The concept is that we've taken a director that we don't know much about and we've decided to educate ourselves. One of the things that we particularly want to do is really gain good perspective on the whole retrospective of his career.
You can make it a little bit funny, you can make it a little bit smart. What was the question? It just wasn't in the Bergman spirit, but sitting down and watching the first few videos, I mean, the list of mistakes, mostly on my part, the lighting, the fact that we didn't have mics, which, I mean, even at this point, we don't have the ideal sound and video quality we want, but we are leaps and bounds from where we were.
I like the kind of amateur or DIY feel that it has because it makes it, I think, more conversational, more real, like this is really us. But at the same time, you know, having weird camera angles and...
and couches, that was the worst. We were literally slouching. At least these chairs give us some semblance of posture.
The equipment wasn't the only challenge that we faced, though. There were challenges as we went along. I mean, there were some lulls in his career that were a little bit more difficult to deal with. And then sometimes when he was at a peak, it was really complex and difficult. So, you know, from my perspective, it was kind of up and down, but I'd love to hear how you felt. Like, did you feel like the project got easier as we went along?
Not necessarily, because I found that after a while, because you're talking about the same artist and you're analyzing a lot of films that were done sequentially, that it starts to feel repetitive. Like we were talking about the same themes, and then, you know, we were sometimes sitting here going, okay, well, we've addressed this before. What new can we offer? And maybe we got around that a little bit by focusing on films in different ways, kind of approaching them to talk about the actors or talk about certain scenes. So how about the project overall? Because almost every single week we sat down and either watched a movie or filmed this series. It was a huge task, and I know we've come back to this and said that a few times, but it's hard for everybody else out there watching to realize how much this has been a part of our lives. Were you ever frustrated with it?
Never. I was 100% committed the whole time.
Well, I didn't say were you committed to the project.
No,
I mean,
yes. I mean, I think yes. You know, you live your real life, and there's a lot of other obligations that you have, and so it becomes difficult to say, like, why are we doing this? Like, really, what is this for? But at the end, like, I think, even though I sometimes jokingly said, it's over.
Yeah, there were a few times that you seemed ready to throw in the towel, and I remember one particular day that I actually thought you might.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of exhausted. There was just a lot of other things happening and other commitments, and it probably coincided with kind of a down cycle in his own career, where the films were just so, and I was like, why am I sitting through another 2.5-hour feature of something that I'm really not enjoying, and then spending an entire evening trying to figure out clever ways to say how clever it was. It just didn't seem like it was giving me the kind of joy and the value that I wanted out of the project going into it. But at the end of the day, I think it was a great investment of time. You know, a couple of years from now, when we go back and look at some of the episodes, it'll be like, wow, I'm really glad we did this. It
was the engagement of the viewers coming back to us that really kept us motivated. Sometimes just the people saying, you know, we like this project, or even we like this Bergman movie, and it was really profound to us. That was enough to keep the ball rolling.
I will say I did not expect that, and it was something I really enjoyed. So we learned a lot about producing an episode, some production and technical elements. We definitely learned a lot about Bergman, obviously. We learned about cinema as a whole. We learned about casting, creating a valid plot, and all kinds of other stuff. But I think we've also had the benefit and the advantage of learning from each other. Not to sound too corny, but you know, I think one of the things that I definitely learned from you is a level of attention to detail when consuming film, because I didn't have that before. Like I would just watch a film in kind of a flat way, if you will, and I would maybe go in depth from like a plot and thematic and character analysis, because I knew how to do that from before. But I never thought about how a score or a camera angle or, you know, the movement of shadow or something and lighting, how it really affected a scene or the vision of the entire film. Like I just kind of absorbed it naturally without thinking about it. And it wasn't until you started really pointing some of those things out that I really started to understand the aesthetic impact of a director's vision.
And I have to say, from you, I learned a lot about sort of piecing together the storyline. With Bergman, often the plot was dense, and I always found that with a certain flair, you managed to kind of trod through sometimes convoluted plot lines and come out with a little more clarity than sometimes I had. I mean, if I reflect back on some of our conversations, you seem to have a little more ease going through the details that I wasn't necessarily able to follow, but I guess maybe we compensated. I think we felt that at the beginning of the project, is that I would be able to offer one side of the analysis while you might be able to offer the other. And I think
all the rest.
All the rest. And I think that that was one of the things that we really weren't surprised by as we went along, and I'm glad that there was that balance between us.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess this really brings this project to a close, and I do want to say I've had a really good time doing this.
Me too.
It's been a special experience, and it's been a long time coming. But I think wrapping it up is a cause for celebration. So
Absolutely.
I thought we would have a little bit of champagne.
I always agree with you.
Right.
Especially when it comes to champagne.
Okay, so this will obviously be edited down. This goes about as smoothly as... Do you want to do it?
No. Like, don't pop it so that it spills everywhere. Don't hold it and pop. No. It's okay, just do what you do.
But so
Woo!
I'm not a lefty, so this could end really badly.
Wonderbar. Well, my friend, to Bergman, his legacy.
And thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. And to you.
And to you, and to ours.
Cheers. Delicious.
Yes. Let's do another and pop more bottles.
So that brings us to the end of this episode of Breaking Down Bergman and the end of the Breaking Down Bergman series. I want to thank our cameraman, Godfrey Ho. He's been very patient for
A loyal trooper.
for a long time, and he's never on the camera, so he doesn't really get the credit that we do, I suppose, in many ways, but he gets his name on the bottom of the screen. But we appreciate everything he's done along the way. And thanks to you guys for sticking around and adding your comments, and we hope that we still hear from you. I know a few of you have asked what the next project is.
I think we're going to take a little bit of time off.
Yeah, well, we're going to need to nurse the hangover.
We might crowdsource some ideas a little bit down the road. We'll see.
But we'll see what happens. But of course, you can always reach us on the Facebook page or on YouTube. We'll still be watching, and we hope that you are too. See you later.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah?
That's pretty good.
Yeah? Okay. Now you should go get some. Put your camera down and go get some champagne.